Now it's time to introduce to our next guest speaker. And speaking about the topic international logistics, we welcome Professor at the International School of Management and Consulting in Germany, Dr. Rolf Neise. We welcome, we see you, and probably if you speak up, we will definitely hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. The floor is yours, please.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. Thanks for the kind words and welcome from my side to this forum. Always a pleasure sharing my thoughts, and what I would like to do and share with you today is something from an industry which is close to the mechanical engineering, but of course it's also giving a bit different insights about what's happening. And I would like to talk about the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic on global logistics, specifically with the question, how does that pandemic change the overall logistics landscape? So there are a couple of nice words before. So what Christoph was saying, I can only support, so work together with universities. I think that will definitely ensure that you are successful in future. Let's have a look, first of all, on the overall global situation, how the GDP growth looks like. And these are latest figures from the OECD. And these are the figures from late September. And if you compare them with the figures from June this year, you can see already that there is a bit of light in the tunnel. And that is mainly because one of the biggest players on the global field here, China, has returned to a slight increase in GDP growth. That wasn't the case in the June figures. You also see, of course, by saying that how volatile all these figures are at the moment and how difficult it is really to predict the future. So I've also added the figures from Latvia, which when we compare them with Germany, so that's my country and currently in Hamburg, where I also live, those figures for 2020 and 2021 look relatively similar. So what the experts are currently saying is that we are working either on an upside projection or on a downside projection. The upside projection is assuming that we have a mild further development of the pandemic and the domestic demand will be up. Whereas for the downside side, the outbreaks will be intensified and we will have a lot of restrictions all around. That is then leading us to a situation where we have a bit of a problem and we won't reach in 2021 the pre-pandemic level. And that is what in the latest discussions also I had what most of the scientists assume. Overall, the global GDP will have a contracting of 4.4%. And again, as I said before, it's a bit of a question mark. When will we return to the pre-pandemic level? As with everything, we have losers and winners, and we heard already a couple of stories of some winners in the pandemic. When you have a look on the overall spending, household spendings, they are, and these are figures from Canada and the US, so figures which will be shared monthly. For other countries, they will be more shared later on and on a yearly base. But we can really use them, and of course we had the situation in April with a strong fall. Overall, the spendings are back and relatively comparable, but the spendings have changed. That is also something everybody of us felt that and is reacting similarly. I think for that industry, what is of interest globally, and that is again from the OECD figures, the spends for automotive, cars, vehicles, also gasoline is not that much reduced as it was often mentioned in the press. There is a slight reduction, but we are talking about 2 to 5% in spendings for that area. What we of course can see is that there are a lot of shifts, and definitely the biggest shift we can see is the shift to more online trade. So again, looking more into the situation for specific companies, there in terms of the revenue, we have a couple of winners in here, and that is directly related to what I said before, to the home deliveries, online trade. So Alphabet and Amazon are typical examples for that. But then, of course, we had all the investments into IT infrastructure, which is leading to a further revenue in companies like Microsoft, also Apple, and last but not least, Facebook, for example. So there's much more spends in marketing activities, mainly for medium-sized and small companies. How will the outlook look like? These are latest figures from the from Germany. So expectations within the economy, very volatile definitely this year, and it's decreasing a little bit at the moment. Nevertheless, these were figures from beginning of November. Now with the latest, and you can also see that on the stock markets, which are up simply because of the situation in the US, where it seems it goes in that direction, what the voters were aiming for. There's a strong link, of course, between GDP growth and trade growth. So when we are talking about a decrease of 5%, we are talking about roughly a 10% decrease in trade growth. So by all saying that, I would like to have a deeper look into the different modes of transport in logistics. And I would like to start with the maritime industry, the most globalized industry we are having in the logistics area. And again, the direct relation between the container transport volume and a GDP. And as we saw before, a minus 4.4% is leading to a reduction of above 4% for container transport. If we have a deeper look into the figures for this year, and that's what you can see on the other graph here, it's very typical. In February, we have that situation with Chinese New Year. But then we have afterwards a slight recovery before the big breakout in April. But what we can also see now is that the figures are even above the figures from 2019. So it is clear that this industry is recovering. And in addition, what that industry has done, and they were also heavily influenced by 2009, 2010 by the Lehman crisis, that they used that crisis to change the price situation, the tariff rate situation. An example which is given here is the Baltic Index, which is not only covering the Baltic Sea, it is covering the global trade. And you can see there's a strong increase compared to last year in terms of container rates. So it's a very good example. Of course, we had a lot of blank sailings, a lot of cancellations beginning of the year. But nowadays, it seems that specifically that industry is back to where they were before the Lehman crisis in 2009. So it looks much more healthy and than ever before. And you can also see that in the results of the biggest players in here. So overall, the situation was used, and it seems it's going in the right direction. The next industry, what we see in here is the air cargo industry. And that is one of the industry which was hit the most, as you all know. So it might be a big surprise that if you have a look on the overall number of flights per day, there's only a reduction of roughly 20%. But when you see which planes were used, specifically in terms of the cargo planes which were used, they used much smaller planes in the aviation industry than they did before, which had an impact on the overall situation. And when you compare the global demand situation with the existing global capacity, you directly see that impact. So there is a gap in capacity here. That industry tried, of course, to also increase the prices, and the prices, the freight rates are higher than they were before. You see that on that chart in here. But the industry overall is still under immense pressure, and it is a big question, when will they get back to normal? The third industry we have to have a look on is land freight. Of course, it is all related to border closures. But if we compare it, the overall, the global situation, I mean, we are mainly talking about smaller sized companies, typically a company who's running 2-3 trucks, and they were really hit very hard. And you'll see the situation here, and that is the breakdown into the regions, that overall there is a down of 18% in terms of losses compared to a June report and a November report. Slightly more recovering in Asia Pacific than in Europe, where we expect a further slowdown. How was that looking on the price situation? It is slightly up, so that is for the European road freight, a benchmark. It is slightly up compared to a year before, but it is still not in a healthy situation. And in that whole industry, another effect, of course, which was there, that we had really low operations costs, the fuel costs were really down. Nevertheless, we expect a lot of bankruptcies in that industry. And there will be a lot will come in terms of mergers, acquisitions, things ongoing like that. Industry which is heavily under pressure. A couple of influences, and we just discussed before supply chain. So from a logistics perspective, what does it really mean? So of course, and we heard a lot about that in the morning, the digitalization will transform the supply chain. So that is definitely something which is, in my eyes, also sustainable for the future. Yes, we will have a couple of restructuring in global value chains, in global supply chains. We heard that discussion about reshoring, nearshoring. That is something, the global figures are not showing that at the moment. They are only showing that for products which are really of importance for society, like mass and things like that. But an overall trend are not shown in figures. The sustainability, I mean, yes, of course, we had a reduction mainly due to lower transports or less transports. But overall, I don't think that we will have a tremendous impact here in that emission area. The skill shortage is also something which can't be afforded here, and that also, that's in my eyes also how the future will look like. Yes, when we are talking about collaboration, and again, we saw a couple of good examples, that is something which is growing. So the dependency on each other, I think, is something which really was flipped up throughout the pandemic, and that will lead to more sustainable collaboration networks. The risks, the increased resilience, that is something everyone is aware of. How did they react it? So definitely inventories were grown, and risk is more management activity now than it ever was before. Online retailing, I think that's something we heard about already. And 3D printing, that is definitely something which will grow. And if we see that also in terms of the situation, nearshoring, reshoring, so that is further driving this trend and tendency. So a couple of influencing trends and parameters where we could think at the moment about that they will stay sustainable, and it will also after the pandemic, we will look into them. So in conclusion, so this is a pic you might have seen. So this is a couple who's running BioNTech, a German company located in the middle of Germany, and they were the first ones who developed a vaccine and giving hope to everyone. And personally, I think it's a story I'm really proud of, and not that it happened in Germany, but also that it happened in Germany, of course. But it's a couple with Turkish roots who came to Germany when they were really young, and they built it up, that company. And I think 40 years ago or 50 years ago, that wouldn't have happened in Germany. And so I think it's a very good example how the society has emerged over the years. So logistics definitely plays an essential role throughout the pandemic. You can see it also in the home deliveries where it strengthens. Nevertheless, the overall reputation of logistics is still not the best ones, and I'm really hoping that it is changing, and that this reputation is getting better. Then the next thing, and back to the vaccine, is without logistics, we wouldn't reach the efforts we would like to have, specifically about that vaccine which was developed by BioNTech. We are talking about a cold chain of minus 70 degrees. That is something which is not available on shelf, so that needs to be developed, and experts all around the world are working on that, but it's definitely a Herculean effort which needs to be fulfilled. So final words, if we move into the next step, definitely logistics is a prerequisite to create a better life. Thanks for listening.